So I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits and challenges of working with artist archives in a classroom setting, and also give some examples of some of the ways that we've found to make it work at Cornell. So some benefits. Um, I find that working with artist archives is really fantastic because many of them do include actual works of art in addition to the artist's papers or preparatory work. And so that gives us a great introduction to art as an information resource. For many students, I think they're so focused on the text of an item, especially when they come to a library. They're looking for a book, they're looking for something they can read and immediately extract information from. And I really love giving them something that has absolutely no textual information on it at all whatsoever. I think it's a great opportunity for them to see that materiality of an item can be very important. It conveys a lot of context and a lot of great information, and can give a lot of insight into not only a person, but historical references as well. Additionally, the artistic collections are more fun in some ways. Again, like I said, I'm an art person, so I'm always going to think it's more fun. But there's something to be said for creating something in a classroom setting that has visual interest tied to it. It can get a little overwhelming for students to be looking at books on books on books that are just text and nothing but text. So pulling in images, pulling in things that have been illuminated gives students an opportunity to engage with a variety of materials and also kind of break up the textual emphasis. Um, Additionally, there's the understanding of an artistic process, both in the planning as well as the execution. Artists' archives often give really great insight into the thought process. We literally just saw that with the lovely example from the National Galleries of Scotland. And also being able to see how things are made. Many artist collections might also include some of the tools that they work with. I especially like to do that with printmaking collections, for example. And finally, as I said, I work with students from a variety of subject areas. And as a result of that, I think it's really important for them to understand the interdisciplinary measure of working with art. It's not just pretty, so that is a nice benefit. Um, but there's also the fact that we see artistic production across many, many disciplines. I've mentioned particularly working with science students, for example. Cornell is a very tech-heavy campus. We have a veterinary school, we have a medical school, we have some pretty extensive scientific research that's going on. And so a lot of our students are there for those types of fields, but are still expected to take classes where they have to engage with historical resources, English resources, etc. And so showing them remember your biology textbook does have drawings in it. That was made by an artist. That is a process that is coming from an artistic background. And it's important for the understanding of what it is that you're working with. So those are just a few of the benefits I've really found and why I try to really encourage students to work with these types of materials. There are also challenges. Learning how to read art, for example. Um, again, we often are working with students that are not coming from a very art background. So getting them to really engage with something, getting them to actually sit with and examine the works, and not feel like they're overwhelmed or that they're getting, that they're not making appropriate suggestions of content or context. Many of them are worried that their observations are too small. And I like to emphasize to them that the point is the details. Tell me what you're seeing. Tell me what you're thinking about. Additionally, there's oftentimes a lack of familiarity with materials. Even people who engage in artistic practice might have certain areas that they specialize in, might be more painting or sculptural focused. And so the technique base can be a little challenging to have to explain to students, especially when we're working with a very limited amount of time. I oftentimes have to spend quite a bit of my time with them explaining this is what a woodblock is, for example, or this is how you create a lithographic print. And they're looking at me like, that is a stone. How are you printing off of that? We're going to explain that in a second. And finally, and this is the one that I think is often the most challenging, especially with undergraduates, is that working with art collections is often very interpretive. It's really meant to be something where it's like, look at it, tell me what you think, tell me what you're seeing, what information do you think is trying to be conveyed? And especially students these days, I tend to find want to get the right answer. They're very used to having things where there is a yes or a no, this is correct, this is incorrect, and that's not the case a lot of times with these pieces. I think it's a great exercise for them to understand that it's okay if they, one, do get it wrong, and two, that sometimes it's okay if there's not an actual correct answer. Additionally, it's okay if they don't have an answer, which can be very, very traumatizing for them when they're like all straight A honor students. So some of the collections that we've worked with to kind of make this possible, I just want to give a few examples. So this one, to start out with, this is a particular favorite of mine. These are the Norman Daly papers, and you'll see here a photograph of one of the archival boxes, and then you will see a variety of artifacts that are associated with this. So Norman Daly was a professor in the Department of Art at Cornell. He started in 1942. And in the mid-1960s, he created this art display, installation, project, use whatever word you want. It's probably been described as all of the above, but related to the civilization of Luros. I'm sure that as I say the civilization of Luros, I have people being like, I have never heard of this civilization. That's the point. Luros is a fictive archaeology project that was created by Daly, and it includes creating artifacts related to the project. Yes, some of the things you're seeing there are in fact an ashtray, an orange juicer. I think the one is based off of, I believe it's a potato masher. But essentially what Daly did was he created artifacts, aged them, created music, created ritual practices, and basically created in this fictive archaeological universe a Iron Age civilization, complete with expert researchers and testimonials about things that people were learning about this civilization. None of this is real. I've decided this is going to be a great project for students to have to do with AI, where it's like, is this actually a professor? Is this actually a paper they wrote? This is just the forerunner to it. But within his archives, we see not only the process of creating these pieces, but we also see how it was displayed, how it was described, and the links that he went to really give academic integrity to this idea. And so where does this come into play with working with classes? This is actually a set that we pull out for a graduate school communications class. They read an article and then they come in and look through the material and use it to kind of apply the theories that they're learning and to figure out, what grants authority, how do we make those decisions, and how are we able to manufacture that in an artistic setting like this. I mentioned that a lot of times I like to work with things that relate to process. This is an example of the Elfrida Abbey papers. Elfrida Abbey was a sculptor, printer, printmaker, and scientific illustrator. She graduated from Cornell and then came on as an artist for the university. She's particularly known for her woodcut and wood engraving collection. And so we have a few examples of her wood engraving blocks here. I like to, again, like I said, pull things like this out so that students really get a chance to engage with the idea of the creative process. Because I do think a lot of them sometimes take for granted where the illustrations in their book are coming from, the process that goes into creating some of them, especially the ones who are working with historic material. I also just love her woodblock prints. We also have some of the examples of the prints as well, but I like to pull out the heavy duty things so that people have to really engage with them. Also, it's a little less scary to hand them a block of wood than a piece of tissue paper. If anyone has ventured to Cornell or has heard much about us, we have a massive ornithology interest at the university. So the next two are going to all be talking about birds. So within our collection, we do have the personal papers and the drawings of Luis Agassiz Fuertes, who was a prominent ornithology illustrator and a lecturer at Cornell within the ornithology department. His papers I really love to pull out because not only do we have the artistic process that he did, we also have extreme documentation of his travels to get these illustrations created, but we also within the collection are able to pair it with these student field notebooks. So these are student field notebooks from Harriet Matilda Davidson. These were actually used in her coursework in the 1930s at Cornell. And you'll see, if we go back and forth, that the drawings we have here and the drawings you see up in the corners are all Fuertes drawings. This is a really fun one for me because it shows the students, again, like I said, that whole emphasis on utility, usability. Um, this is a particularly fun one to pull out with not only the art and art history classes, seeing how their work could be used in this kind of practical setting, but also it's a great one for students from other disciplines to have to engage with how art is informing and also helping to provide greater access to the ideas that they're talking about. As I said, we're going to be very bird focused here for a sec. Many of us maybe have heard of the ornithologist John Gould. I have found, though, that one thing that a lot of people are maybe less familiar with is his wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Gould was actually John Gould's primary illustrator for his books up until her death in 1841. And so within our collection, we do have a collection of prints related to Gould, in addition to various one of the ornithology tomes. But I like to pull out this collection of watercolors. So one, people can see her artistic output, and it gives us a chance to talk about the hidden creativity of women in some of these spheres. Additionally, this is an opportunity to kind of really think about that preparatory stage for students. The watercolors would not have been how things were illustrated in the books. The books are typically done with lithographic printing, which Elizabeth was also helpful in creating. And so it's really interesting to be able to see those juxtaposed against each other. And so we actually have here The Birds of Europe by John Gould. So you can see one of the examples of Elizabeth's lithographic printing techniques. But the watercolors give us some good insight into how she's preparing her landscape, how she's placing the birds in it. And they're also they're beautiful. I'm not gonna lie, it's one of my favorite pieces in the collection. And finally, my last example, again, we're going very science heavy here, but I have found that this is my fun way of getting the science students to not be scared of the archives. This is actually not an artist archive. This is the archives of a celebrated 18th century chemist, Antoine Laurent Lavoisier, considered the father of modern chemistry. We hold one of the largest collections of Lavoisier's papers and intellectual output outside of France. And one of the things that's really, really interesting about the collection we have is it also includes these original drawings by his wife, Marie. You'll notice that these drawings look very nice, ruled out, grid paper, and also look very much like laboratory pieces. And that's because you'll see the correspondence in his elementary treatise of chemistry, because like Elizabeth Gould, she was her husband's primary illustrator. Additionally, because we're able to see some of the material that we have related to the production of his books, as well as his scholarly career, we also know that not only was she his illustrator, she was a major translator for him as well. And I think it's interesting that translation was a service that she provided for her husband, because I do find that a lot of times these artistic pieces allow for, again, like I said, that greater access, a translation of ideas and thought processes, even if you can't read the language. For example, you will notice that I said all of that in English and did not read the French. Yes. So I do have a list here, and this is all linked, so I'm happy to send slides as needed. But I find that these artist archives provide just a wealth of information and great points of engagement and growth for students in the classroom. Art bridges languages, it bridges disciplines, it provides an opportunity for students to rely on their analysis skills and their ability to convey their observations and thoughts, instead of being able to just write down yes, no, circle and answer kind of thing. And in these particular examples, I think that these archives also provide an emphasis on and showcase more than just finished products. They give us an insight into the creative process as a whole. They give insight into how do we develop narratives and how are things used in a practical way as well. And as a result, I find that this is, I think, a really great way to extend the enduring legacy of these artists and provide an even greater and more diverse impact and value from their work.